The air was so thick with humidity it could have been buttered. Dawn hadn't fully broken, just a pale gray light filtering through the mist and vines, the kind that turns men into silhouettes and metal into myth. Somewhere in the dripping green silence, a boot snapped a twig, and that was all it took. The first burst came from deep in the tree line, a rippling cough that sounded more like an industrial sewing machine than a weapon of war. The AK-47 was doing what it was built to do. Spit led through mud, sweat, and foliage without caring about the circumstances or the man behind it. The return fire, sharper and faster, came from an M16. High-pitched cracks like an angry wasp swarm cutting through the jungle air. For a few violent seconds, the war wasn't about ideology, nations, or tactics. It was about two rifles locked in a duel across 30 meters of green chaos. By the time the echoes died, the forest was quiet again, just the distant hiss of insects and the smell of burnt powder. Both sides melted back into the undergrowth, but the contest between their rifles would echo for decades. Soldiers who fought there still debate which one won. The truth is less simple. The AK-47 was born in the ruins of World War II, designed by a sergeant who believed weapons should serve the soldier, not the other way around. The M16 was born from a boardroom and a drawing board, engineered by a country that believed science could outthink mud. When these two philosophies met in Vietnam, they collided harder than the ideologies of the Cold War itself. To the grunt in the bush, none of that mattered. What mattered was which rifle fired when it was supposed to. One carried the soul of a peasant army, rough, forgiving, and lethal at close range. The other carried the hopes of a nation that thought precision could replace pragmatism. Both would prove half right, half wrong, and utterly inseparable from the war that defined them. That humid morning firefight might have been a skirmish to the brass, but to the men who survived, it was an education in mechanical faith. The M16, sleek and futuristic, asked for cleanliness, proper ammunition, and obedience to the manual. The AK asked for nothing but a finger and a target. The American rifle punished neglect. The Soviet one invited it. Each reflected its maker's worldview. One trusted systems, the other trusted people. In that sense, the rifles didn't just clash in the jungle. They mirrored the men who carried them. The U.S. soldier, burdened with supply lines, maintenance routines, and an instruction card laminated against the rain. The NVA or Viet Cong fighter, carrying a weapon that looked like it had been carved out of tractor parts but worked every time. When historians talk about the Vietnam War, they mention the Tet Offensive, Khe Sanh, and Saigon. But the real story of that conflict, and so many that followed, lives in the mechanical dialogue between these two weapons. Every firefight, every jam, every spray of automatic fire whispered an argument about design, ideology, and the nature of war itself. And so, before we pick sides, we have to understand how two nations ended up arming their soldiers with completely opposite answers to the same question. How do you win a gunfight in hell? They began in different factories and under different assumptions. The AK was not the product of corporate focus group or an officer's whiteboard. It was the product of experience, scarcity, and a sergeant's stubborn common sense. Mikhail Kalashnikov didn't set out to make a masterpiece. He set out to make something that would work when everything else failed. The rifle that bears his name is a manifesto in stamped steel, simple, cheap to produce, forgiving of grime, and mercilessly effective at the distance where most jungle fights happen. Its blueprint reads like a farmer's instruction manual. If you can hammer it, you can fix it. If you can point it, you can kill with it. The M16 began life in a different spirit. It was the child of a technological confidence that believed lighter, faster, and more precise would win wars in the modern age. Armalite's engineers and the American procurement system asked different questions. How do we give a young soldier an accurate, controllable weapon that takes advantage of modern ammunition and training? The M16's slender profile, small bore cartridge, and straight line ergonomics are the answer. It was a rational design, elegant on paper, promising greater range and a lighter load for the man who carried it. Those design philosophies reveal themselves as plainly as fingerprints once the rifles leave the factory. The AK's loose tolerances tolerate dirt. Its gas system forgives neglect. The M16 demands attention, cleaning, the right propellant, and a supply chain that supplies the correct magazines and ammunition. One is built to survive the world as it comes. The other is built to excel inside a system that runs on routine and logistics. Philosophy shapes logistics, and logistics shape outcomes. The Soviets and their clients assumed supply lines would be uneven, armies would be vast and decentralized. Weapons needed to function in hands that might never see a proper armorer. The West assumed centralized supply, technical training, and maintenance would be part of a soldier's life. The AK's ethos is redundancy and resilience. The AR's ethos is optimism and leverage. Doctrine followed design like shadow follows a body. Where the AK spread through partisan and conventional ranks alike, it brought with it a tactical culture that valued volume of fire, close-range shock, and the psychological effect of persistent suppressive fire. The M16, light and accurate, enabled doctrines which emphasized marksmanship, controlled bursts, and fire discipline at range. Put bluntly, the AK gave you the freedom to be sloppy and deadly. The AR gave you the capacity to be precise and theoretically more lethal per round. Neither answer is a moral one. Both are tactical compromises. Consider the soldier who must march 5 days, cross a river, and then fight at first light. Which rifle best serves him? The AK's forgiving nature reduces the cognitive load of maintenance under strain. The M16's reduced recoil and lighter ammunition reduce fatigue over long patrols. The choice isn't technical only. It is logistical, psychological, and cultural. The jungle is an unforgiving arbiter of design philosophy. It's where simple mechanics meet complex life, mud, rot, humidity, and improvisation. In the wet dark, the AK's rough-hewn logic often feels like a blessing, a weapon that does not argue when you need it. But the M16's precision answers other questions. If you can keep it fed and clean, it extends the effective engagement distance and reduces collateral waste of rounds. Both philosophies therefore carried advantages that became advantages only when matched to the reality around them. There is an irony in all of this. Both rifles were answers to industrial problems, products of entirely modern economies. Yet their strengths are traced back to the oldest logistical questions. How easily can you make spare parts? How quickly can you train a recruit? How much do you trust the supply chain? Kalashnikov's answer leaned towards decentralization and improvisation. The AR's answer leaned towards centralized efficiency and technological leverage. So when two armies armed with opposite philosophies faced off in jungles and villages, the battle revealed something deeper than metallurgy and machining tolerances. It revealed a clash of assumptions about what war would demand. That clash would not be settled by a single firefight, but by years of adaptation, upgrades, and bitter lessons learned under tree canopy and monsoon. The rifles would evolve, but so would the men and doctrines that depended on them, and the jungle would keep teaching its hard lessons, indifferent to which side's logic seemed more elegant on paper. In the end, it all comes down to what you're launching downrange. The rifle is just the delivery system. The real debate, the one that outlasted the Cold War, the one that's still raging in gun forums and Pentagon briefings alike, is about the bullet. When the Soviets fielded the AK-47, they paired it with a cartridge that defined their approach, the 7.62 by 39 mm, short, stubby, and heavy enough to break through light cover. It was designed for mid-range combat, a bridge between full-power rifle rounds and pistol calibers. It didn't need to be aerodynamic, it just needed to punch through jungle brush, wood walls, or whatever else stood between the shooter and his target. The bullet left the muzzle at around 2,300 feet per second, a plodding jog compared to Western rifle rounds, but it carried momentum like a hammer. America's answer 2 decades later was the 5.56 by 45 mm NATO. Smaller, faster, and optimized for controlled automatic fire, its creators wanted a cartridge that would let soldiers carry more rounds, shoot flatter, and still have enough punch to take down a man-sized target. When it left the M16's barrel, it screamed out at over 3,000 feet per second, nearly supersonic arrogance in brass form. On paper, the difference looked like progress. In the field, it depended on what kind of war you were fighting. The 7.62 by 39 hit hard and stayed stable. It ignored brush and thin trees. If it struck flesh, it tended to punch straight through, doing predictable but brutal damage. The 5.56, by contrast, was a show-off, a high-velocity dancer. When it hit soft tissue, it could yaw or fragment, creating devastating internal wounds. But that effect depended upon range, barrel length, and velocity, all the things the jungle loved to mess with. Through the dense air and short sight lines of Vietnam, soldiers discovered that physics had a sense of humor. Engagements often happened under 100 meters, sometimes at 30. In that range, the AK's heavier bullet could tear through bamboo, helmets, or sandbags with ease. The M16's lighter round, designed for longer sight lines and precision, sometimes deflected or lost energy after hitting vegetation. That led to the infamous myth that the 5.56 couldn't go through a banana leaf, which wasn't true, but it did highlight how a round built for open field marksmanship struggled against the randomness of foliage. But the trade-off went both ways. The 7.62 by 39's rainbow trajectory meant that beyond 300 yards, you might as well lob pebbles. Its art turned precision shooting into an art form of guesswork. The 5.56, however, flew flat and consistent, making aimed fire and repeatable hits far easier. That mattered to an army that measured success in accuracy, not volume. The jungle narrowed those advantages, but it didn't erase them entirely. Ammunition also defines logistics. A soldier carrying AK mags has power in each shot, but weight in every step. A full combat load for an AK user was about 300 rounds, if you didn't mind feeling like you were hauling a car battery on your back. An M16 rifleman could carry twice that and still move faster. For U.S. troops slogging through rice paddies, every ounce saved was worth its weight in survival. Then there's the recoil story, the AK's push versus the M16's nudge. That single difference changed how both rifles were fired. The AK rewarded short, violent bursts. It was a controlled explosion you had to guide. The M16 allowed longer controlled fire, precise double taps, and easier transition between targets. Under stress, that could mean the difference between suppression and precision, between noise and effect. Still, the jungle rarely cared for theory. It rewarded whoever got the first accurate burst off. In that environment, the ballistics charts became background noise. Mud, rain, and adrenaline don't reflect muzzle velocity. What mattered was confidence, trusting that the bullet would do what you expected. Soviet and American designers reached the same uneasy conclusion. There is no perfect bullet, only one that matches your doctrine and your terrain. By the time both sides realized that, thousands of soldiers had already learned the hard way that cartridges are philosophies in metal form. The AK's 7.62 promised reliability through brute force. The M16's 5.56 promised efficiency through precision. And in the jungle, both were occasionally betrayed by their promises. Next came the real test. How those theoretical ideals behaved when soaked in monsoon rain, clogged with red clay, and caked with carbon, a test of reliability versus maintainability. And that's where the argument got personal. The jungle doesn't care how clean your rifle is. It's a place where metal sweats and wood rots, where oil turns to sludge overnight and gunpowder sticks to your fingers like swamp glue. The air itself feels alive, full of mold, spores, and judgment. In that kind of world, reliability stops being a bragging right. It becomes theology. The AK-47 was a believer's weapon. It worshipped simplicity and forgiveness. Loose tolerances meant that grit, sand, and water could come and go without shutting it down. You could bury it, rinse it, shake it, and it would still send rounds downrange like it hadn't noticed. The safety doubled as a dust cover. The piston system shrugged off filth, and the steel parts, though heavy, were built to take the abuse of soldiers who had bigger problems than a cleaning kit. The M16 was the opposite, a weapon that trusted its environment and its engineers a little too much. When it was first issued, troops were told it was self-cleaning, which might be the most expensive lie ever printed on a manual. The rifle's tight tolerances, great for accuracy, left no room for error. The direct impingement gas system blew hot, dirty gas straight into the action, meaning every shot made the rifle a little dirtier and a little less reliable. Add tropical humidity, inconsistent powder, and soldiers had been issued no cleaning gear, and you got the disaster of 1966. Dead Americans found next to jammed rifles. Letters home told the story better than any after-action report. The rifle jammed and I couldn't get it cleared, one wrote. I'm going back to the M14. Those words spread faster than malaria. Within months, the M16's reputation was radioactive. It didn't matter that fixes were already on the way. Chrome-lined chambers, better powder, cleaning kits, and training programs. The damage was done. Soldiers fight with trust, not specs. And once that trust is gone, it's hell to win back. Meanwhile, the AK-47 didn't need trust. It just needed ammunition and a finger. Viet Cong fighters could leave it caked in mud for a week, wipe it with an oily rag, and expect it to work. That reliability wasn't an accident. It was a cultural design choice. Kalashnikov understood what it meant to fight with conscripts, farmers, and partisans. His rifle had to be idiot-proof. The American rifle, by contrast, was meant for a professional army with a logistics chain and a field armor every few clicks away. In Vietnam, that chain stretched thin and snapped. There's an old saying among soldiers: amateurs talk tactics, professionals talk logistics. The M16 proved it. Once proper cleaning routines were taught and the ammunition reformulated, the rifle redeemed itself. Accuracy, weight, and handling turned out to be real advantages once the bugs were ironed out. But that redemption didn't erase the jungle's verdict. It only softened it. The AK had never needed redemption in the first place. Reliability isn't just about mud, though. It's about how much maintenance the average soldier can sustain in the field before exhaustion, fear, or boredom set in. The M16 demanded discipline, regular stripping, scrubbing carbon from the bolt, oiling the chamber, reassembling it just so. The AK demanded only that you didn't lose it. Soviet doctrine assumed that soldiers could die, but the rifle should live. American doctrine assumed the soldier was the system, and the rifle was a tool within it. Two philosophies, same battlefield, opposite outcomes. When both rifles were pushed to their limits, they revealed their true characters. The AK was the grizzled brawler who could take a beating and keep swinging. The M16 was the high-performance sports car that would outrun anything until it hit a pothole. Both got their soldiers killed at times. Both saved lives in equal measure. But the image stuck. To this day, reliability is shorthand for AK, and cleaning kit is shorthand for M16. It's a branding the U.S. Army spent decades trying to overcome, and one the AK never had to advertise. In the end, each rifle reflected its creator's environment. The AK was built by a man who'd fought in the mud and expected the worst. The M16 was built by a nation that believed technology could outthink chaos. In the jungle, chaos always gets a vote. And as both rifles proved, survival wasn't just about whether your gun would fire. It was about how your army taught you to fight when it didn't. The rifle doesn't fight by itself. It's carried into battle by doctrine, drilled into habits, and amplified by orders. You can trace entire military cultures through their fighting manuals. Who gets the first volley, who suppresses, who maneuvers. The AK and the M16 didn't simply sit in the hands of men. They were handed down as parts of a fighting idea, and those ideas shaped how forests and villages burned. Soviet and Chinese doctrine treated small unit combat as part of a larger mass. Fire was a blunt instrument, emplaced, sustained, and often delivered by squads that emphasized shock and volume. The AK fit into that like a glove. Its cartridge, magazine capacity, and forgiving reliability encouraged tactics that used a lot of ammunition close in. Ambush, swarm, and the brutal arithmetic of attrition. Partisan tactics favored quick, decisive ambushes, where the first uncontrolled burst could wreck a patrol and vanish into the canopy. The AK encouraged suppression by intimidation. It turned volume of fire into psychological currency. The American approach, conditioned by Cold War thinking and advanced logistics, emphasized marksmanship, fire discipline, and combined arms coordination. The M16's accuracy and lighter ammunition enabled planned, armed fire from squads that trained on grouping, zeroing, and controlled bursts. The doctrine wanted each rifleman to be a precise node in a distributed system. Observe, fire, adjust. That made sense on paper and on many battlefields, but it demanded time, training, and a supply chain that rarely went hungry. In the jungle, doctrine meant reality. Ambushes and counter-ambush drills became the basic currency of survival. For guerrillas, mobility and concealment trumped range. For conventional forces, securing perimeters and establishing fire superiority mattered more. The AK's strength favored hit-and-run tactics and the use of terrain to negate longer range advantages. The AR's strengths encouraged fire teams to hold their fire until they could make it count. But holding fire in a jungle ambush is a dangerous thing when an enemy's first bursts carry through foliage and men. Patrol doctrine illustrates this clash plainly. An AK-armed patrol could move fast, build positions quickly, and sustain a firefight by sheer volume. An M16 armed patrol might have better long-range control, but if the first contact degraded its trust in weapons or logistics, that advantage evaporated. The U.S. developed procedures to mitigate this: pre-combat checks, weapons discipline, and combined arms support when available. The communists relied on redundancy: distribute weapons, accept losses, and keep the pressure. Both worked in their contexts. Command doctrine also reshaped how both rifles were deployed. Soviet-style doctrine tended to decentralize small unit autonomy. Commanders expected initiative from lower echelons, partly because communications and oversight were limited. That meshed well with a rifle that required little maintenance and less logistical attention. U.S. doctrine centralized certain capabilities: artillery, air support, medevac, assets that could amplify an effective M16 armed squad with a force multiplier. When those assets were present and timely, the M16's strengths were magnified. When they weren't, the AK's self-reliance became a decisive factor. Night operations provide a sharp contrast. Suppressive rapid fire and surprise were king. The AK's torrent could saturate a jungle hollow and cover an extraction. The M16's accuracy made night interdiction cleaner if you had illumination and discipline. Again, it wasn't that one was categorically better, it was that the soldier's training and the headquarters' ability to support a chosen doctrine determined which rifle's advantages mattered most. Doctrine is also political. What armies believe about their enemies, their casualties, and their strategic arms shapes the tactical choices they prefer. Guerrilla movements valued weapons that were easy to distribute to conscripts and partisans. Democracies investing in professional armies accepted higher logistical demands for promised accuracy. Over time, those choices fed back into procurement, training, and even national industrial policy. In practice, the jungle produced hybrid tactics. Guerrillas learned to mimic aspects of conventional fire control, while conventional forces learned to move lighter and more furtively. The rifles evolved alongside tactics. Optics, bayonets, and magazine types shifted with experience. Tactics adapted to weapons, weapons were adapted to tactics, and both adapted to the unforgiving teacher that was the jungle. So when you watch footage or read a memoir, remember this: a rifle's victory is rarely a simple matter of metallurgy or engineering. It's the product of doctrine meeting terrain, logistics meeting exhaustion, and orders meeting chaos. The AK and M16 were tools shaped by different schools of thought, and the jungle forced both schools to improvise, learn, and occasionally suffer for their assumptions. If there was ever a laboratory for hubris, humidity, and high-velocity metal, it was Vietnam. The place turned design philosophy into a blood test. Both rifles arrived there wrapped in theory, and both left wrapped in myth. The AK and the M16 were not just tools, they were national statements, and the jungle didn't care about either of them. The first real meeting between the two came not in some cinematic firefight, but in 1,000 small ambushes that no one wrote home about. U.S. patrols moving through triple canopy terrain suddenly found themselves under torrents of automatic fire. It wasn't accurate, but it didn't need to be. A single burst from an AK could chew through bamboo, kick up mud, and send soldiers diving for cover. The noise alone was paralyzing. Short, brutal bursts that seemed to come from everywhere at once. When the Americans returned fire, their M16s answered with a flatter, sharper crack, smaller but faster. It was like hearing two languages of violence argue in real time. In the early days, those arguments often ended badly for the M16. The rifle that was supposed to revolutionize infantry combat instead developed a reputation as a death sentence. Reports poured in of weapons jamming during firefights, of soldiers forced to clear malfunctions under fire with cleaning rods. One Marine wrote in his diary that the weapon was more dangerous to me than the enemy. The issue wasn't the rifle's design as much as the bureaucratic shortcuts behind it. Ammunition made with the wrong powder, no chrome lining, and zero training on maintenance. The result was catastrophic. Meanwhile, the AK-47 had already earned its reputation among the Viet Cong and North Vietnamese army. It could be stored in a rice paddy, dropped in a river, and still function. Captured rifles were coveted trophies. American troops often swapped their own M16s for them when the situation allowed. It wasn't just about reliability, it was about confidence. In a fight that was as much psychological as physical, that mattered more than muzzle velocity or group size. But war evolves faster than weapon myths. In 1968, the M16A1 arrived. Chrome lined chamber, cleaning kits, better magazines, and ammunition that finally matched the rifle's gas system. Suddenly the narrative began to flip. Soldiers who had cursed the M16 months before started praising its low recoil, lightweight, and accuracy. In the hands of a trained rifleman, it was deadly. Rangers and Marines learned to exploit its controllability for tight bursts, its balance for rapid target transitions, and its flat trajectory for precision fire beyond the reach of the AK. The contrast became almost poetic. The AK was the weapon of the jungle itself, organic, rugged, and instructive. The M16 was the weapon of an industrial superpower, precise, lightweight, and complex. When they met in battle, each rifle exposed the other's flaws. The AK's shorter effective range meant its users had to close the distance. The M16's sensitivity to dirt forced constant vigilance. Both were perfectly suited to the men and doctrines that used them, and both punished anyone who fought outside those limits. In firefights near places like Nha Trang, Dak To, or the Iron Triangle, captured footage showed this clearly. U.S. soldiers laying down rapid, accurate fire from prone positions, while the enemy returned sweeping volleys from concealed flanks. In those exchanges, the M16's accuracy was decisive, when it worked. When it didn't, when the gas tube clogged or the bolt refused to seat, no amount of engineering pride could save the man holding it. By the war's midpoint, the battlefield was a junkyard of lessons. American forces learned to maintain their rifles like religion. NVA troops learned to ambush closer and faster. U.S. logistics poured in cleaning kits and spare parts. The North kept manufacturing stamped steel and wood as if it were printing press runs. Both sides adapted to the jungle in their own way, and both realized the terrain, not the rifle, chose the victor. The M16 would eventually emerge from Vietnam scarred but vindicated, its early failures forgotten in later decades of refinement. The AK would emerge as the world's most recognizable silhouette, a symbol of rebellion, revolution, and reliability. Vietnam proved that neither rifle was perfect, but both were inevitable. The jungle didn't crown a winner, it simply revealed the truth that every soldier already knew. The best rifle in the world is the one that fires when you pull the trigger. When the last helicopters left Saigon and the jungle finally went quiet, the rifles didn't retire, they just changed continents. The AK and M16 had graduated from their first major war and were now free to wander the planet like rival religions, each preaching a different gospel of firepower. The AK went everywhere a revolution could fit in a backpack. It flooded Africa, the Middle East, and Latin America. Not through export brochures, but through ideology. The Soviet Union and China treated the rifle like a diplomatic handshake. An AK crate here, an instructor there, and soon entire movements were firing from the same hymn sheet. From Angola to Afghanistan, it became the signature of insurgency. Cheap to make, easy to copy, and impossible to kill. Nations that couldn't agree on borders could all agree that the AK worked. The M16 took a different route. Its travels were official, contracts, aid programs, NATO standardization, and American allies brought into the fold. Where the AK was spread by politics, the M16 was spread by policy. It became the rifle of standing armies and funded governments. Each shipment came with training manuals, spare parts, and the promise of Western alignment. In time, both rifles became shorthand for the side you were on in the Cold War. Each new conflict became another case study in adaptation. In the Middle East, sand replaced mud as the enemy. The AK barely noticed. The M16 family learned quickly, adding forward assists, dust covers, and improved coatings. In Central America, American advisors carried the M16A1 while their counterparts toted AKMs smuggled from Cuba or North Korea. It was the same fight as Vietnam, just in a different jungle, with the same rain of brass. Africa turned the rivalry into theater. In Rhodesia, Somalia, and the Congo, child soldiers and mercenaries alike wielded the AK like it was an extension of willpower. Its durability and simplicity made it the only constant in wars where nothing else worked. The M16, by contrast, was selective about where it thrived. It needed stable supply lines, spare parts, and soldiers who weren't scavenging their next magazine from a corpse. The AK could run on chaos. The M16 required order. By the late 1970s, the two rifles had evolved into entire families. The AKM, AK-74, and countless clones rolled out of factories from Bulgaria to China. The AR-15 platform begat the M16A2, the M4, and a dozen export variants. Nations that once imported them began making their own. Israel's Galil, South Africa's R4, and even Finland's Valmet all took cues from the same DNA. The line between the two philosophies blurred. Everyone wanted the reliability of an AK with the precision of an M16. No one quite achieved it. But perhaps the most telling difference wasn't technical at all. It was cultural. The AK became an icon of resistance, painted on flags and propaganda posters, worn on t-shirts by men who couldn't name the man who designed it. It stood for the idea that the underdog could fight back. The M16 became the face of professional soldiering, clean lines, optics, and drills. It stood for precision, training, and state power. The irony was that both sides envied the other's strengths. Guerrillas dreamed of optics and range. Regular armies wanted a rifle that could survive being dragged through a swamp. In the 1980s, as U.S. forces modernized and Soviet blocs crumbled, both rifles had outgrown their origins. They were no longer just tools. They were brands, each with their own loyal following and evolutionary offshoots. The world had split into two camps of small arms culture, and most of it wasn't even ideological anymore. It was practical. You used what you could get, what your mechanics could fix, what your recruits could understand. The AK-47 and M16 were no longer fighting each other in the jungle. They were competing for relevance in deserts, cities, and mountain passes. The jungle had been their crucible. The rest of the world became their marketplace. And as both rifles evolved and spread, they carried with them the ghosts of the men who first trusted or cursed them in Vietnam. Their legacy wasn't just the wars they'd fought, but the endless arguments they inspired about what makes a good weapon. Simplicity or sophistication, forgiveness or precision, the hammer or the scalpel. By then the rivalry had stopped being about nations. It had become about ideas. Every rifleman knows the truth the brochures never mention. The gun is only as good as what feeds it, what carries it, and what keeps it alive. Logistics isn't the sexy part of warfare, it's the part that wins it. The AK and the M16 might have been the headliners, but the supporting cast, ammunition, magazines, spare parts, and maintenance decided who walked off the battlefield. The AK's logistics chain was brutally simple. It was designed for a world that might not have one. A Kalashnikov could digest ammunition made in any of a dozen countries, some of it so dirty and inconsistent it looked like it had been rolled in gravel. Magazines were heavy, curved steel tanks that could double as hammer or shovel if needed. Spare parts, optional. You didn't replace an extractor spring, you just stole another rifle. Soviet doctrine treated rifles as consumable assets, like helmets or boots. If it broke, replace the man or the gun. There was always another crate. The M16's world was different. Precision demanded consistency, and consistency demanded infrastructure. The rifle's accuracy depended on tight tolerances, clean chambers, and ammunition that burned just right. That meant controlled supply chains, factories that met exact standards, and a logistics apparatus that could move parts from Kansas to Quezon without losing the box. The American system could do it, but only as long as it remained intact. When it faltered, the rifle faltered with it. Ammunition weight was another invisible but relentless enemy. A soldier with an M16 could carry twice the rounds of an AK fighter, but that only mattered if the rounds arrived in the first place. In remote outposts, ammo shipments decided strategy. A unit low on 5.56 might hesitate to fire. A guerrilla force swimming in 7.62 by 39 might waste it like water. Supply creates doctrine as much as doctrine creates supply. Then there were the accessories, the small things that made big differences. The AK needed almost none. A sling, a bayonet, and maybe a side folding stock if you were fancy. The rifle was bare bones by design. Simplicity was part of its identity. Every part had a second purpose. The cleaning rod doubled as a tool. The bayonet sheath worked as a wire cutter. It was the Swiss Army knife of communism. The M16, on the other hand, grew up like a tech company. New accessories every year, some brilliant, some useless. Optics, bipods, rails, grenade launchers, flash hiders, and experimental mounts, all of them adding capability but also complexity. The American rifleman slowly turned into a walking Christmas tree of modular attachments. It made him more lethal, but also more dependent on gear, batteries, and supply lines. Maintenance was where ideology really hit. The M16 came with a checklist that looked more like an aircraft manual than a rifle guide. Carbon buildup wasn't just dirt, it was a performance hazard. Soldiers learned to strip and clean the rifle daily, sometimes twice. It was a culture of discipline that rewarded habit but punished neglect. The AK laughed at all that. Its maintenance guide could be summarized in 3 steps. Clean it if you feel like it, oil it if you have it, fire away. The difference bled into morale. An AK user could focus on survival and tactics. An M16 user had to keep one eye on the weapon's condition. In a prolonged campaign, that subtle psychological load mattered. A rifle that never failed was a comfort. A rifle that demanded care was a liability when exhaustion set in. But the real irony? Both systems evolved in the other's direction. The AK eventually gained optics, polymer magazines, and Western-style upgrades. The M16 family became more reliable, modular, and forgiving. Decades later, the rifles that once symbolized 2 opposite ideologies had started to look suspiciously alike. In the end, logistics always wins. Battles are fought with rifles, but wars are fought with spare parts, transport, and fuel. The AK was a product of scarcity that turned scarcity into strategy. The M16 was a product of abundance that weaponized precision. Each worked best when its world worked as intended. Take away the supply chain, and the M16 became fragile. Take away the cause, and the AK became meaningless. In the jungle, you could smell the truth. The rifle in your hands didn't just represent your army, it represented your entire system. And that system determined whether your weapon would save you or die with you. Every weapon is a reflection of the person who carries it. You can measure muzzle velocity and cyclic rate all day, but none of it matters if the man behind the trigger doesn't trust what he's holding. Wars aren't just fought between armies, they're fought between beliefs, between what soldiers think their rifles can do and what they feel their rifles will do when the world goes sideways. For the AK, that belief was rock solid. It didn't inspire affection, it inspired faith. Soldiers, guerrillas, and even kids too young to shave all learned the same thing: pull the trigger, it fires. You didn't have to baby it, you didn't have to clean it half the time. The AK never judged you. It was the patron saint of the imperfect soldier. That kind of forgiveness builds a special kind of confidence, the quiet kind that doesn't need inspection. The M16 demanded a different kind of devotion. It wasn't a rifle you trusted blindly, it was one you earned the right to trust. You cleaned it, learned its quirks, and followed the manual like it was scripture. When it worked, it was magnificent, accurate, light, responsive, but it was also unforgiving. If you skipped a step, it remembered. That created a split personality in the ranks, those who loved it and those who swore it would get them killed. Training made the difference. U.S. forces spent weeks learning marksmanship, field stripping, and the choreography of controlled fire. Drill sergeants hammered trigger discipline and slight adjustment into muscle memory. The rifle wasn't just a tool, it was an extension of doctrine. The M16 rewarded discipline, punished neglect, and reinforced the idea that technology and training could overcome chaos. The AK's training regimen was practically the opposite. It was built for speed and simplicity. Recruits learned to shoot fast, reload faster, and clean it occasionally if someone remembered to bring oil. The philosophy was utilitarian. Teach a man to fight, not to fuss. It made for armies that could mobilize quickly and insurgents who could become dangerous overnight. You didn't have to love the rifle, you just had to know where the safety was. That simplicity shaped morale in ways the engineers never predicted. When your weapon never lets you down, you stop worrying about it. You move, fight, and think differently. You take risks. The AK's reputation as a gun that always works wasn't just a technical detail, it was a psychological shield. It gave poor fighters courage and rich armies arrogance. The M16's early failures, meanwhile, did long-term damage to trust. A soldier who believes his rifle might jam under pressure fights differently, hesitates, overcompensates, fires fewer rounds, or clings too tightly to procedure. For a few years, that mindset haunted American patrols in Vietnam like a superstition. It wasn't until the M16A1 proved itself that confidence returned. And when it did, that confidence was contagious. Soldiers began to realize they could outshoot their enemy if they maintained their gear. Pride replaced paranoia. Both rifles built cultures around themselves. The AK culture was fatalistic, simple, rugged, and proud of surviving on nothing. The M16 culture was methodical, precise, procedural, and confident in planning. One trusted instinct, the other trusted order. Each matched the psychology of the nations that built them. But human beings are messy, and even the best training can't predict what happens when adrenaline takes over. Under fire, fine motor skills collapse, breathing turns ragged, and the line between doctrine and panic blurs. That's where simplicity wins. The AK's chunky selector lever, oversized controls, and intuitive reloading weren't elegant, but they were accessible when it counted. The M16, though lighter and faster in trained hands, could be a puzzle for the untrained under pressure. Still, training evolved. American troops learned to drill through chaos, to clear jams without thinking. Soviet and later Russian troops refined their marksmanship and control. Over time, both sides moved closer to a middle ground. Skilled soldiers with reliable weapons, rather than relying purely on one or the other. Because when the shooting starts, it's not about doctrine or data, it's about faith. Faith in your weapon, your training, and your ability to outlast the panic. And that's why the human factor has always been the great equalizer. The jungle, the desert, or the city, it makes no difference. The man with the rifle wins, not because of what he's holding, but because he believes it'll work when he needs it most. And for over half a century, two rifles have been teaching the same lesson in opposite dialects. One in the language of forgiveness, the other in the language of discipline. Time ages weapons like it ages soldiers. The bones stay the same, but the scars tell the story. By the end of the 20th century, both the AK and M16 had outlived the wars that made them famous. Yet instead of fading into museums, they reinvented themselves. Each new decade brought a fresh reason to keep them in the field, and a new generation of soldier arguing about which was better. The AK family didn't evolve so much as multiply. Factories across the old Soviet sphere and beyond kept churning out variants like rabbits. The AKM refined the original stamped receiver. The AK-74 switched to the lighter, faster 5.45 by 39 cartridge. Mikhail Kalashnikov's own admission that the West might have been right about the small caliber, high velocity rounds after all. Polymer furniture replaced wood. Muzzle brakes tamed recoil, and folding stocks made it more portable. Yet at its heart, it remained the same, a steel piston driving a simple bolt through dirt, grime, and neglect. The M16 took a different evolutionary path, one more like a sports car line. The A2, A3, and A4 versions improved sights, ergonomics, and burst control. Then came its younger, stockier brother, the M4 carbine. Shorter barrel, adjustable stock, rails for every gadget imaginable. The M4 became the face of modern American warfare, a modular rifle that could morph from a close-quarters broom handle to a precision carbine with the twist of a mount. The spirit of the M16 lived on in aluminum and polymer, still obsessed with optimization. And then something unexpected happened. The two rifles began to resemble each other. The AK sprouted rails and optics. The M16 adopted piston systems for reliability. The Soviets had once mocked the AR platform for being delicate. Now modern AKs were borrowing Western ergonomics. The Americans had once mocked the AK for being crude. Now they were adding adjustable gas blocks and forgiving coatings. The rivalry that once divided ideologies had turned into a mutual admiration society of engineers. Even their users blurred. Special forces units across the world began picking and choosing. Russian Spetsnaz sometimes carried AR pattern rifles for precision work. American operators in dusty corners of the world often grabbed local AKs when blending in, or when they just wanted something that would survive a sandstorm without complaint. The old either-or argument dissolved in the reality of use what works today. But despite all the upgrades, the philosophical core never changed. The AK remained the rifle of the resourceful, the weapon of choice for militias, insurgents, and soldiers who logistics stopped at the border. The M16 family remained the tool of professional armies, calibrated, standardized, and endlessly customizable. Both were now symbols more than just instruments. Culture kept them alive as much as technology. The AK turned into a global icon, printed on flags, tattooed on arms, brandished by revolutionaries and rappers alike. It stood for rebellion, for resistance, for the idea that you could build a weapon with a file and a dream. The M16, meanwhile, stayed the poster child of discipline and precision, the symbol of the soldier who fights with training, not chaos. Its modern derivatives carried lasers, optics, and national budgets in every component. In conflicts like Iraq and Afghanistan, both rifles met again, this time in opposite hands. American troops, with decades of refinements behind their carbines, faced insurgents wielding battered AKs older than their parents. The terrain was different, the politics had changed, but the argument was the same: simplicity versus sophistication, durability versus precision. Even as new rifles appear, the HK416, the FN SCAR, the SIG MCX, both the AK and the M16 refuse to retire. They are still being produced, upgraded, and carried into wars that weren't supposed to exist anymore. It's as if the world can't quite let go of them, because together they represent the full spectrum of what combat demands: trust and technology, ruggedness and refinement. Maybe that's the real lesson of the evolution. No matter how advanced firearms get, the same questions keep coming back. Do you build for the soldier you wish you had, or the one who's actually out there, tired, muddy, and scared? The AK and M16 answered that question differently, and both were right. By now the question had circled the globe, bounced through every veterans bar and internet forum. Which rifle is better, the AK or the M16? The truth is, that question doesn't have one answer. It has many, and all of them depend on the circumstances. A rifle's worth isn't proven on a spec sheet. It's proven by how it behaves when everything else goes wrong. So instead of arguing philosophy, let's walk through the battlefield itself and see where each one earns its stripes. Scenario 1. The ambush in the jungle. Short distance, zero warning, humidity thick enough to chew. Here the AK reigns. When the world collapses into panic and vegetation, you don't want elegance, you want violence that works. The AK's heavy round, shorter length, and forgiving action turns chaos into opportunity. It doesn't care that your hands are slick with sweat or that you fell face first into a swamp 5 seconds ago. Pull the trigger, it fires. In a world where seconds decide survival, that's worth more than any ergonomic grip or ballistic coefficient. Scenario 2. The defensive perimeter. Now switch sides. You're dug in, field of fire clear, visibility out to a few hundred meters. The M16 comes into its own. The flat trajectory, low recoil, and high accuracy mean every round counts. You can control bursts, correct for wind, and place shots precisely while conserving ammunition. The rifle was born for this environment: structured defense under command and control. It's the same reason U.S. forces learned to dominate firefights once they could dictate engagement range. The M16 rewards the disciplined, the trained, the ones who plan before pulling the trigger. Scenario 3. The long patrol. You're 10 clicks into nowhere, carrying everything you own, and still expected to fight when you get there. Weight becomes the real enemy. The M16 wins here too. Lighter ammunition, lighter rifle, easier to carry more rounds. Over a week-long mission, that advantage compounds. But there's a catch: maintenance. Every night you'll need to clean it, oil it, and pray your rifle loves you back. Forget once, and the jungle will remind you why you shouldn't have. The AK, by contrast, would have let you sleep. Heavier, yes, but less needy. So the winner depends on whether you trust your gear or your endurance. Scenario 4, the insurgent's arsenal. No supply chain, no armor, just whatever you can carry and steal. This is the AK's kingdom. It's the weapon of people who don't have manuals or spare parts, but do have determination. You can strip one down with a boot heel and keep it running with motor oil and sandpaper. That's why it's been the backbone of rebellions from Havana to Kabul. In this world, sophistication is a liability. The AK isn't just a rifle, it's a survival tool. Scenario 5, the urban fight. Narrow streets, concrete ricochets, and dust. Both rifles can win here, but for different reasons. The M4, descendant of the M16, dominates with optics, maneuverability, and tight handling. The AK, shorter variants like the AKS or AK-103, punches through barriers and doesn't jam when the air is full of debris. If the battle drags on, the rifle that gets cleaned wins. The city punishes neglect but rewards adaptability. And both platforms have proven they can adapt when handled by a professional. The pattern is clear. The AK wins in chaos, neglect, and scarcity. The M16 wins in structure, discipline, and control. The AK loves extremes, mud, blood, and improvisation. The M16 loves procedure, clean hands, defined ranges, and good logistics. They're mirrors of the systems that made them. One says make do, the other says do it right. But every soldier knows that battles don't always follow doctrine. An AK in well-trained hands can outperform an M16. A well-maintained M16 can humiliate an AK. Context is king, and the only real constant is confidence. The man who trusts his rifle more wins more. So when people ask which one is better, the right answer is another question. Better for who? Because the AK and M16 aren't just two rifles, they're two solutions to the same eternal problem: how to stay alive long enough to see another sunrise. The jungle never cared about who built the rifle. It didn't salute flags or read field manuals. It just tested metal, men, and the myths they carried. In that steam-choked crucible where the AK and M16 first crossed paths, the verdict wasn't written in after-action reports. It was carved into experience. Both weapons survived, and in their survival, they told us what kinds of soldiers built them and what kind of wars the world keeps fighting. The AK-47 began as a peasant's dream made real, a rifle that turned every man, woman, or child who could hold it into a threat. It democratized violence. It gave shape to rebellion and endurance in places where the supply chain ended at the tree line. It didn't demand much. It didn't promise much. It just worked. In the jungles of Vietnam, the deserts of Africa, and the mountains of Afghanistan, it proved that simplicity is a form of sophistication, the kind born from necessity, not design conferences. The M16 was the opposite, a weapon born from optimism, precision, and the belief that science could civilize war. It tried to make the infantrymen lighter, faster, and more accurate. It rewarded the soldier who followed instructions and punished the one who didn't. And for all its early sins, it evolved into a weapon of remarkable consistency. The same traits that doomed it in the mud of Vietnam made it shine in the deserts of Iraq and the cities of Fallujah. It was a rifle that learned, iterated, and survived its own mistakes, something very few weapons or nations ever managed to do. Together they changed how the world fights. The AK taught armies to design for the lowest common denominator and win through volume, not perfection. The M16 taught that with enough discipline, training, and technology, precision can overcome brute force. They weren't just rifles, they were ideologies cast in steel and aluminum, philosophies you could shoulder and aim. But the real truth? The jungle didn't pick a winner. It simply reminded both sides of their limits. The AK could fire in the filth, but lacked the finesse for long precision fights. The M16 could cut a clean hole through a distant target, but demanded care that the battlefield rarely afforded. Each had its moment, its environment, its faithful followers. Each created legends and horror stories in equal measure. Half a century later, their descendants still face each other, and sometimes stand side by side. Special operators might carry custom M4 carbines on Monday and AKs on Tuesday, depending on where they are and who they're blending in with. Insurgents still wave battered Kalashnikovs in propaganda videos, while the M16's sleek silhouette continues to mark the presence of state power. The lines blur, but the rivalry never does. If you strip away the politics and paint, you're left with two simple truths. The first, reliability is freedom. The second, precision is power. The AK gave its users one, the M16 gave the other. What you value more says less about engineering and more about who you are, what kind of fight you expect, and how much control you believe you'll have once it starts. In the end, both rifles became immortal, not because they were perfect, but because they were right enough. Right for their times, right for their people, right for the wars they were born into. The AK endures because it forgives. The M16 endures because it adapts. So if the jungle could talk, what would it say? Probably nothing polite. It would just shrug and remind us that war doesn't care what you prefer. It only cares what works when the trigger's pulled. And that's the final verdict. The best rifle is the one that fires when you need it most, and the one you trust when everything else fails. Because in the end, the jungle doesn't choose sides, it only keeps score. I'm Dave. I appreciate you watching. Please subscribe, like, comment, and share. And until next time, stand tall.